Welcome to the first worldwide Lyme disease awareness rally. Thank you for turning out so your voices could be heard. Yay! And without much ado, Rochelle Holden, my number two, who I couldn't have done this without. Welcome.
Just a few words. I have some very good news for all of you. I'm going to read you a letter that was sent to us from Congressman Chris Gibson. Letterhead is on the Congress of the United States, House of Representatives, dated May 10, 2013. Dear friends, thank you for inviting me to participate at your Lyme disease awareness rally today. Unfortunately, I cannot attend personally. I am very encouraged to know that the thousands of Lyme advocates across our nation continue to grow in strength and numbers, as witnessed by your participation today. We all know about Lyme and other tick-borne illnesses and the increasing damage they are causing across all aspects and all levels of our society. We know this is a growing epidemic in significant areas of our country. We know that the detection, treatment, insurance coverage, and understanding of these diseases are absolutely unacceptable as it currently stands in our nation. This must change. Hold it to the end, please. I believe the federal government has a leading role to play to deliver that change, and it is to that end that I have committed my efforts on Lyme in Washington. Within the last couple of years, progress has been made in addressing some of these issues, including the following: a bipartisan bill to create a federal tick-borne disease advisory committee has been introduced in the House of Representatives. H.R. 610 will ensure that a broad spectrum of scientific and medical viewpoints are representative in public health policy decisions, including ILAD's research, and that information disseminated to the public and physicians is likewise balanced. Language has been passed in the House Appropriations Committee that supports the Agricultural Research Service to conduct nearly $5 million in tick-related research, including providing additional authority resources in the area of tick population suppression, supporting and increasing critical Lyme research funding at both the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institute of Health for targeted grant funding. We are working with colleagues both in the House and Senate, and with Senators Gillibrand and Blumenthal in the Senate, to increase awareness and focus on Lyme and other tick-borne illnesses, not only in the legislative branch, but across the entire spectrum of federal government. We know we have a long way to go, and that thousands of individuals and families are suffering as we gather today. But your efforts are making an impact, and it is vital that this movement continues to strengthen and grow across the country. Ultimately, I believe it will achieve the critical mass necessary in Washington to effectively deal with this epidemic that continues to spread across the globe. And it is events like this that help make it happen. In closing, I commend all of you who are on the front lines of this fight, and I pledge to each of you that I will continue to carry your message and your commitment back to Washington to change the status quo on Lyme within the federal government and advocate for more improved research and sensible policies that will help us conquer this disease like we have with so many others in our nation's history. Thank you, and God bless you. Very sincerely, Chris Gibson, Congressman, 19th District, New York. I believe the second thing is more important, and that it is from the State of New York Legislative Resolution, Assembly number 383. There are so many names, I think it would be senseless to name them all. But memorializing Governor Andrew M. Cuomo to proclaim May 2013 as Lyme Disease Awareness Month in the state of New York. Whereas the health and well-being of the citizens of the state of New York is of paramount importance to this legislative body, and whereas Lyme disease is a common but frequently misunderstood illness that, if not caught early and treated properly, can cause serious health problems. And whereas, according to the Federal Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that's the CDC, and the New York State Department of Health, Lyme disease was identified and named in 1977 when arthritis was observed in a cluster of children in and around Lyme, Connecticut. And whereas the Council of the State and Territorial Epidemiologists, CSTE, designated Lyme disease as a nationally notifiable disease in January 1991. And whereas Lyme disease is the most common vector-borne disease in the United States, it is caused by the tick-borne spirochete Borrelia burgdorferi, which is transmitted to the human bloodstream by the bite of various species of ticks. And whereas children aged 5 to 9 and adults in their 50s and 60s experience the highest occurrence of Lyme disease. And whereas Lyme disease can cause early symptoms such as rash and flu-like symptoms such as fever, muscle aches, headaches, fatigue, and whereas Lyme disease can be treated with antibiotics if caught early, the disease often goes undetected because it mimics other illnesses or may be misdiagnosed. Untreated, Lyme disease can lead to severe heart, neurological, eye, and joint problems because the bacteria can affect many different organs and organ symptoms. And whereas the best protection against Lyme disease is to wear light-colored clothing when outdoors and to check oneself carefully for ticks when going back inside. And whereas during 2008, a total of 35,198 cases of Lyme disease were reported in the United States, a 28% increase over the previous year. The CDC indicates that the actual number of reported cases of Lyme disease that meet the CDC criteria is 10 times the amount reported, bringing the actual number of cases that meet the CDC criteria to 351,000 980 for 2008. And whereas the incidence of Lyme disease is greatest in the northeastern, mid-Atlantic, and north-central regions of the United States. Whereas due to the large population of deer for ticks to feed on, the occurrence of Lyme disease in New York State is high. From 1990 to 2008, New York had the highest number of total reported cases of Lyme disease in the United States, 48% higher than Connecticut, the state with the second highest number of total reported cases. And whereas Lyme disease accounts for 90% of all vector-borne infections in the United States, the ticks that spread Lyme disease also spread other diseases, such as ehrlichiosis, I may have pronounced that wrong, babesiosis, and other strains of Borrelia. All of these diseases in one patient makes diagnosis and treatment more difficult. And whereas the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, indicates that Lyme disease reported cases were only 10% of actual cases that meets its surveillance criteria. And whereas Lyme Disease Month provides an opportunity to focus on this significant and complex disease, to provide information on and raise public awareness of its causes, effects, and treatments, and to underscore important education and research efforts surrounding Lyme and tick-borne diseases. Now, therefore, be it resolved that this legislative body pause in its deliberations to memorialize Governor Andrew M. Cuomo to proclaim May 2013 as Lyme Disease Awareness Month in the state of New York, and be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution suitably engrossed to be transmitted to the Honorable Andrew M. Cuomo, Governor of the state of New York, adopted by an assembly on May 6, 2013, by order of the Assembly Lawrence L. Kreitzer Court. And this is to be returned to them, and you can see the official seal. And now, I would like to introduce to you my friend and colleague, Dr. Kenneth B. Liegner.
Thank you very much, Rochelle. Rochelle Holden and Vanessa have done yeoman's work in getting this rally organized. There's a tremendous amount of effort. Before we get started, I'd like to kind of give some thanks all around. First of all, thank God we have a sunny day, because we're kind of bracketed by rain on Thursday, rain on Saturday, so we have a beautiful sunny day. And I pray for the grace of God that we achieve our goals. I also want to thank many, many people who have come together to make this rally happen. The worldwide Lyme rally kind of grew organically and spontaneously, and it seems, as I looked at the names of who brought this rally together, there seems to be a preponderance of women, and I think that's really been true in the history of Lyme. The greatest, strongest moving force in progress in Lyme disease has been women and mothers. I learned that Vanessa Holden was organizing the New York City rally, And I reached out to her, and we've been working together to enable this rally to happen. We also reached out very widely to members of the Lyme community, and the gratifying thing is that we had very, very positive response from all areas of the community. Sometimes areas of the community that have been sometimes competing with one another, they all were unanimous in supporting this rally, not just New York City rally, but across the country and across the world. I would say we have a universal moral support. Some of the people who might have liked to give some funds to help support the rally were not able to do because of the organization of the legal organization of their organizations, but we did get enough funds that we were able to, so shall we say, pretty much at least not be in the red. I'd like to thank TBDA, LDA, LymeDisease.org, the New York City Lyme Disease Support Groups, Empire State Lyme, Linda Lobus and people in Michigan, also iGenX, in addition Clangen Labs, someone named Sharon who made a contribution. Also, we discovered that Dr. Charles Ray Jones did not have transportation, and we let the community know that, and people came forward and subsidized our hiring of a limousine for him, so we do expect him to be here. Okay, I would like to introduce the first speaker, Daniel Cameron. Dan and I went into practice together roughly the same time, around 1985. We happened to plunk ourselves down in Westchester County. And he has training as an epidemiologist, which has been very, very useful. And he has been one of the frontline physicians caring for persons with that disease that does not exist, chronic Lyme disease. And being in this field, I realized early on, is not for the faint of heart. It's dangerous for the physicians, and Dan has risen to the challenge. Dan?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Vanessa and Rochelle, and Ken for the introduction. Especially thank you, everyone in the audience, because it shows you the strength of a call like this. I can tell you that I've been in practice for 26 years, and far too often you hear the same narrative. Chronic Lyme doesn't exist. It's nothing more than aches and pains of daily living anyway. And I can tell you with that kind of narrative, I continue to see patients during those 26 years with problems. Like I'll see a teenager who's not doing very well in school. Their grades drop from A- to C-, or they're missing 26 out of 35 days. They're in special programs. They're afraid they're not going to get into college, and if they get into college, it's going to be a community college. And all they've been told for months or years is that it's nothing more than aches and pains of daily living. It's nothing. It doesn't exist anyway. And so, fortunately, when I could take a kid like that on and work with them, work with an antibiotic, work with the emotional side, the exercise, the diet, and get someone like that better, it messes with that narrative. Second is I'll run into a mother who's having so much trouble trying to work, trying to take care of their kids, and by 3 o'clock they're exhausted, their concentration's poor, they're irritable, and not just the irritability of being a person, but this strange irritability, this anger that was talked about 20 years ago by Lajigian and Steer. This type of sickness is wiping them out, and they're sick, and they get the same narrative. Chronic Lyme doesn't exist, nothing more than aches and pains of daily living. They've been to plenty of doctors, been to a neurologist, rheumatologist, infectious disease, told the same narrative. They come in, and it's such a blessing to take someone like that and get better. And lastly, you find some gentleman who's has a business struggling like all business owners, and they just don't think they can make it anymore. Too much exhaustion, too much concentration issues, their sleep is poor, they're lightheaded, they're dizzy, they're discouraged, and by 3 o'clock they're wiped out, they're not sleeping, And you take someone like that and say, you've been wasting time for too long on that same old narrative. Nothing more than aches and pains of daily living, and it doesn't exist anyway. So after all those years of hearing that same narrative, is that I could tell you that I went to medical school like so many doctors that trained at a great place, University of Minnesota, got an epidemiology degree at a master's level at the same place, trained at Beth Israel as a residency, which is only about 7 blocks from here, trained at Mount Sinai in the community medicine, and there's nothing in the literature that supports that narrative, nothing to support the narrative that chronic Lyme doesn't exist, nothing that says that it's nothing more than aches and pains of daily living. Instead, I was heartened when the NIH trials very carefully showed that these people existed. They came into the studies with good faith. They have clear, severe symptoms. They did show it is difficult to treat, especially people like at the Columbia study where they were sick for 9 years on average. So I can tell you that those types of research reinforce that we have to kill that narrative, kill that narrative that keeps coming out of infectious disease specialists. And I can tell you that based on my research, based on my colleagues in ILADS, based on a number of the speakers that are speaking today, I could tell you that narrative is dead wrong. Instead, what we have through ILADS, which I'm a member of, through all of the other professionals, through the support leaders, that narrative should be clear and loud that chronic Lyme exists, that it's severe, and there's something we can do about it. And with your help, with everybody coming to a forum like this, a rally like this, and with all the work you do at your own local level, is that we should take that narrative that chronic Lyme doesn't exist and toss it under the bus. I don't want to hear it anymore. I don't want to be a doctor who has to deal with that type of narrative, and I don't want patients to come in saying they wasted precious weeks, months, and years with that narrative. And I think if we constantly keep that narrative that we're talking about today, just keep that in mind. Pretty simple, that chronic Lyme exists, it's plenty severe, and that we can do something about it. We can diagnose it early, we can take care of it even if it gets rough. And so thank you very much for allowing me to come here and complain about that old narrative. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Our next speaker is Dr. Eva Shapi, who is a microbiologist at the University of New Haven, who's very interested in Lyme and, in fact, has a master's level training program. And I think you've trained something like 60 young scientists. And I know that some of them spent time in my office, and some of them are applying to med school too, right? And Eva has been using advanced methods to study the Lyme disease organism. And she also recently published an improved method that enables a high percentage of Borrelia to be isolated from the blood. And hopefully that will set a new standard, a new gold standard for diagnosis of Lyme disease. Eva, thank you very much.
And thank you for the organizers, Vanessa, Michelle. What a wonderful day, what a wonderful event. Let me introduce my partner in crime. Her name is Michaela Melillo, and she is the member of our research team. She knows how to collect ticks. She's already collected some research material. Yes, Michaela? And she also can pronounce the word Borrelia burgdorferi. Thank you. Again, my name is Eva Shapi. I'm assistant professor at University of New Haven. We have a research team, over 70 students actually trained in Lyme disease research. Some of them has already applied for medical school or already in a field working. Some of them actually was behind the culture test Dr. Ligner just mentioned. Our goal at the research lab is to better understand Borrelia. I need to remind you that Borrelia burgdorferi was discovered 30 years ago. Let me repeat it, 30 years ago, and you're still standing here and waiting for answers. Something really went wrong. I think we can agree on that. So what we need to do here, we need to, I'm not just asking money for research. I'm asking the scientists to be more open-minded and not ignore some very important research data. And I'm not talking about the last 30 years. I actually want to remind you, just a couple of days ago, I was reading a literature from 1916. 1916, British Journal of Medicine. Talk about, have you read the paper? Exactly. They talk about different morphological forms of spirochete and how they form those forms after stress. What happened in how many years now? 120 years now? We're completely ignoring data like that. So one of the research goals in my research lab is to better understand Borrelia. This is a very smart bug. This bug can form all kinds of different forms, and we already shown that some of the forms is extremely antibiotic resistant. And when the minute Borrelia sees or smells, or I don't know how he knows, that we try to kill it, either by any kind of environmental stress, antibiotic, it turns into those forms. So what can we do about it? Obviously, we have to understand better those forms. Obviously, we need more research and try to understand how those forms can be eliminated. Probably some of you know that recently our research group applied for some grants for atomic force microscopy. This is our goal, to better understand those forms. Again, back to what happened the last 30 years. Why the research committees ignored these facts and only worked on the spirochete forms? Let me remind you, even the test we're using is based on antigen presentation on the spirochete forms. We don't know if the cyst form, the granule form, the biofilm form has any other antigens which might be not detected or tested. I try to remind the researchers to be flexible, open-minded. So we don't need this rally anymore. Until one person cannot recover from Lyme disease, we cannot ignore ideas. Remember what happened with H. pylori? Dr. Marshall had to drink the H. pylori culture to prove that H. pylori can cause ulcer. Dr. Barbara McClintock stopped publishing in 1930s because she discovered jumping genes, which is one of the major discoveries in genetics. They both got ridiculed. Obviously, when you should see what kind of email I'm getting every day. Word always in the emails, your results are impossible. We don't believe that mycoplasma can exist in ticks. We don't believe Borrelia can form biofilm. Impossible. I don't believe in this word. Impossible is not a word you as scientists should even say. So I ask you, I'm not asking for money. I'm asking just for your support, because sometimes it's definitely way much more than even donations. Because sometimes, just a couple of months ago, I was sort of reviewing my major research project, and every single one is controversial. I'm working on biofilms, I'm working on cyst forms, on granule forms. Recently, we start to understand Morgellon disease. If you talk about Lyme disease, Morgellon disease is another interesting one. And I have to say, that night I couldn't sleep. So your support, everyday support, those emails, it means a lot to me, a lot to my research group, and even a lot to my 7-year-old daughter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Eva, and thank you, Michaela. Our next speaker is Gerald Simons. Gerald is a physician's assistant, and he got his bona fides working with Joe Burrascano out in the East End of Long Island. And actually, I looked at his bio, and I see that he is not only is he active in Lyme disease, and presently he's working with Dr. Jeffrey Morrison, but he also is very active professionally in training other physicians' assistants. Jerry?
Hey, how's it going? Nice to see you. Thanks. Great. Wow, what a good turnout. Who's here to fight for Lyme disease? You can make it louder than that. Great, good for you. Well, I'm here because I love helping Lyme disease. Most of you know that I've had it myself. And, I'm pretty pissed off at the way that a lot of us are treated. I see a lot of old Burascano patients out there and a lot of new patients here, but my big thing that I'm fighting for is uniformity. We want the same blood work. We want the same treatment. We want the same kind of recognition that any other kind of patients with chronic disease are going to have. Who's pissed off at being ticked off? See what I mean? Absolutely. And the thing is, ticks are dangerous. A lot of people will get a tick bite and it'll never bother them. They're the lucky ones. But what about everybody that gets a tick bite and it affects them for years and decades later, and it affects their whole family? We know Lyme disease destroys more than your health. Who's had their family destroyed by Lyme? Who's had their bank account devastated by Lyme disease, right? Who's been to more than 15 doctors here just to get recognition, right? This is why we're here. We're all really pissed off about this. And, all of us that treat Lyme doctors and PAs and nurses, we need not only your help with advocacy, but we need the government and we need more research and publications. And finally, we're getting through to a little bit of those points here or there, and that's fantastic. I remember in 1995, when I was at Burascano's office, we didn't have nearly the amount of resources that we have in 2013. So things are definitely getting better, but they're still nowhere where we need them to be. We're fighting for uniform testing through the X Foundation. We've worked with other groups. They have a contest going for a new type of Lyme disease. The IBIS company on the West Coast is working on my personal interest, which is endosymbiont. Anybody ever heard of endosymbiont? That's the biggest deal in Lyme disease. That's the biologic principle, how germs live inside of other germs. So that's the big deal with Lyme disease, is all of the endosymbionts that we have. You treat Babesia, and then a year or two later, Bartonella comes out. And then a year or two later, Lyme disease comes out. That's this concept of endosymbionts. So you've got your homework tonight. You better start reading about it. So again, I'm here because I'm angry, and I know that you're angry, and we want to get better treatment, better insurance, better doctors, less abuse from doctors, and everything like that. So I could certainly keep going on and on and on. People who know me know that I can talk for a really long time, but I know we've got a bunch of other speakers coming up, and I think we're going to keep on fighting. So I think Dr. Ligner is going to be introducing our next speaker. And again, keep on fighting. Thanks. So, great. I tried to keep it great.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I am deeply honored to introduce a man who has helped thousands and thousands and thousands of young people, children, who is a very, very bright man, a very, very dedicated man, a man who went to divinity school before he went to medical school, and was a friend of Martin Luther King Jr., and who marched with Martin Luther King Jr. in Alabama. Isn't that right, Ray? Charles Ray Jones. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce Dr. Charles Ray Jones.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you for all coming. I'm Ray Jones, as you was introduced as Ray Jones. I'm a physician in the practice of pediatric adolescent medicine, and I'd say that most of my practice consists of children who have tick-borne diseases. They come from every state in America, every province in Canada, from Mexico, from South America, Central America, and every continent abroad, including the Orient, including China and North Korea. They also come from India, Pakistan, Australia, Samoa, New Zealand, and every single country in Europe. There's an epidemic going on that's massive. Most of the countries don't realize it, that the children are being deprived by not being treated of the opportunity of fulfilling their genetic potential and growing and being contributors to society. This can be prevented by increased awareness of the fact that this is a global epidemic. It's not just here, it's all over the world. And it can be cured. It can be cured. The main obstacle in the preventing cure is lack of awareness. And the other main obstacle is lack of appropriate treatment for as long as it takes to completely eliminate the organisms that might be causing the infection. I had a little boy who came from Armenia 2 weeks ago. He'd been to 40 different physicians in Moscow, London, Toronto, all over the United States. No diagnosis for 4 years while he was declining in body and in mind. He came in and told me that he did not want to get a day older, because every day he got older, he got worse, and he kept getting farther and farther away from his health that he once enjoyed. He was very much aware of his decline, and I told him he was fixable, and he said, when? I said, soon. Now, he was referred to me by a psychiatrist, Virginia Scherer, who was seeing him on the basis that he did have definitely problems pertaining to the tick-borne diseases, and one was the presumptive diagnosis of psychosis. Virginia concluded that he had an organic infectious basis for his problem and referred him to me. And indeed, he has an infection-induced autoimmune encephalopathy that is very nicely treatable with antibiotics and IV gamma globulin. He's just one of the many children, and the problems that we face because they aren't being treated can be manifold. There can be a state of mind, a state of destruction in the mind that can lead to a criminal type behavior. And this has happened. This has happened. And this is all preventable. And it's all treatable. And it's up to you. It's up to me. It's up to all of us. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Ray. Our next speaker is a mental health professional, Tracy Hands, who has been working with people in, I think it's Jersey, right? Who has understood the importance of working both psychologically as well as with in conjunction with physicians who treat the physical aspects of the illness. It's extremely important to have the psychological aspects dealt with concurrently. That's often very, very helpful. Tracy, where are you? Oh, thank you, Tracy. Here you go.
Thank you. Okay. So, a lot of doctors before me addressed the question of why Lyme, what makes Lyme different. So I'm just going to summarize initially to say, it can cause multi-system disruption and nervous system disease. So Lyme does so many things, starting with the impairment of our immune system. It hides in the body. It can affect every organ in our body. Because the bugs love our body tissues more than they do our blood, they burrow, and they can hide from tests and our immune system. So these things make diagnosis and treatment extremely difficult. Some of this stuff bears repeating. The approved tests are only often as accurate as a coin toss. This is also because of strain variation. We have identified over 300 strains of Lyme worldwide. Do we know how many our test tests for here in the U.S., the insurance-covered test? One. So this is a huge, huge problem. This is a huge medical crisis like those before me have shared. Symptoms. You know, I was asked earlier, what are the symptoms of Lyme disease? And it's so, so hard. Why is it hard? Because the symptoms can be neurological, urological, musculoskeletal, dermatological, gastrointestinal, psychiatric, cardiovascular. This reflects everything from bad reflux to motor tics and to heart failure. That's a huge range, and there's a lot of severity, especially with chronic Lyme disease. The practitioners working with people, many of whom you have heard already from today, all of them, our population of Lyme patients is getting bigger and bigger, and these doctors need to be a jack of all trades. They need to be systemic practitioners to identify and manage the multi-system disruption that Lyme can cause. You know, as a therapist, I've worked with dozens of Lyme patients throughout the New York and New Jersey area, all struggling with a wide range of chronic issues that affect their well-being. These can include brain fog, depression, anxiety, chronic debilitating headaches, struggles from severe memory loss, all due to Lyme and its complications. So how can it affect our well-being? It becomes chronic and hard to treat because it takes so long to diagnose. And delayed diagnosis of illness from one bite of a tick can be life-altering. Previously unexpected diseases, syndromes, and symptoms are now finally being linked to this persistent infection from Lyme disease. Chronic infection from Lyme creates a chronic inflammatory response. I think Jerry mentioned that. This inflammation increases pain sensitivity, lowers frustration tolerance, can create sleep disturbances, cognitive difficulties, and cognitive deficits. This is there's no small issue here. This can result in fatigue, depression, as I mentioned before, anxiety, social isolation. Who's not going to be socially isolated if they're spending time going to 60 doctors prior to diagnosis? Now, a comment on children. Children are rarely diagnosed, especially initially, with Lyme disease because why? Those complaints, the ones that I mentioned, they're vague and they're thought to be related to part of everyday struggles of growing up. So more on mental health and the need to educate practitioners. So poor interaction, I'm first going to make a comment about the immune system and the nervous system. Poor interaction between these systems confuses unaware doctors, sometimes resulting in the use of the term mass hysteria, for instance. Lyme symptoms can and often do migrate throughout the body, further encouraging physicians to reject the idea of a physical illness. One day their patient's knee can hurt, the other day his elbow. Who has had this? The migratory pain, it's very, very common. So as I said, patients go from doctor to doctor, often searching for what's wrong. Oftentimes, they're told that there's nothing wrong with them. Or they're told that it's all in their head. They can be told that they're just depressed or that they're just anxious. Because much of the general population struggles with anxiety, with depression, with poor concentration, these issues haven't raised the antenna for a lot of infectious disease doctors. Lyme is an infectious disease that influences all of these symptoms. Often mental health professionals are the front line. We need to educate our mental health professionals, along with our doctors and the public, about the biology of these symptoms. So lack of education in physician and clinician training has shifted patients from believing my doctor will protect me and help me. If I get sick, I get treated, and then I get better. I trust my doctor. Shifted it to they now must have to educate their doctors and their therapists. I speak also from firsthand. Taking treatment in progressive steps, often long-term. Taking on multiple roles to heal ourselves or our children out of necessity. We become parent, teacher, therapist, nurse, sometimes diagnostician, all in one. This is what's happening to our families. The patient has to be an active part of the treatment process, has to be. The best outcomes are when the patient has become educated on the disease and its complications and its trajectory and the multiple roles that family members must take. This takes a village at this point because there is an international crisis. We say 30 nations, 30 states. It's far beyond that. I just saw a huge video from Perth, Australia, where they show, across the world, the devastation there looks just as critical as it does here. So just to summarize, the patient has to be an active part, and that the best outcomes are when they become educated on their disease and become an active participant. Please educate yourself and pass the information around you by going to the International Lyme and Associated Disease Society, ilads.org. We need this. Thank you. I had one more. So that's what I've read. That's what I wanted to read, and now here's what I want to say. I want to say that I'm speaking for all of my patients who could not be here, for all of the people that are in bed and cannot get themselves up, that are still struggling from brain fog. Most of my time is spent holding the hands of warriors. So the humanitarian that's here, who spoke at the Tick-Borne Disease Alliance rally recently, she did a really eloquent speech and said that there are Lyme warriors, there are Lyme pioneers. And I want to say that all of you here, we have them all here. We have our warriors and we have our pioneers. And I give a shout out to you now, to all of you that are here, all of you that are helping educate and spread the word. And just the very fact that you're all here and united shows us that it cannot get us down. If I spend a year chasing 60 doctors to get a diagnosis on why I can't walk, that's social isolation. We're doing the opposite right here, right now. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Tracy, and I want to second what Tracy just said, is thank you all for showing up. It's so important. We're going to have a special announcement. Today, May 10th, is a special day because it's Worldwide Lyme Disease Rally and Protest Day, but it happens to be another kind of special day. Doug?
Today is not only Lyme Disease Awareness Day around the world. Today, the person that coordinated this event is Vanessa Holden. I really don't know where she is. Here she is. Can you come up here, Vanessa? All these folks would not be here if it was not for Vanessa. And not only is it Lyme Disease Awareness Day, but today is also Vanessa's birthday. So we are all going to sing happy birthday to Vanessa. So, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Vanessa. Happy birthday to you. Thank you. So somewhere along here, we have 100 cupcakes to share with folks. So just share them around. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Vanessa.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Jeff Christensen. Jeff Christensen, I've never met him, but he has a very, very important role to play in that he volunteered his property to be a location where one of the truly pioneering efforts at control of deer ticks has been instituted, and that is the four-poster. The four-poster is a device that applies acaricide to the deer. It's really the deer that is most responsible for the large numbers of deer ticks because it's on the deer that the deer ticks mate. And a single deer at one point in time may have at least 500 deer ticks on its body. If they happen to be females, all of those female deer ticks will result in 2,500 to 3,500 eggs. So a single deer at a single point in time can be responsible for hundreds of thousands of deer ticks. So Jeff, please come over. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Very nice to meet you. Thank you. Good to meet you.
Hi, my name is Jeff Christensen, and I'm here ostensibly as an advocate for as a member of the Fire Island Wildlife Association and the local community on Fire Island where I live, the Community Association. But my real claim to this podium is the fact that I have one of these on my property on Fire Island, and this is clearly one of the best ways to address the problems of tick infestation. We've been hearing from a lot of the best minds dealing with how to treat Lyme. But this addresses the other side of the equation, how not to get Lyme in the first place. So for all of us, it's for all the others who haven't been infected like we were, to save them from, no pills, no shots, no medical insurance issues. That's the benefit of this. Now, I've been going to Fire Island all my life, and the deer were never an issue until they began, as they do, overpopulating and spreading ticks. So once the ticks and the disease started spreading, there became an issue to do something about the deer. I am also a Lyme patient. I got it way back in the early days when most doctors didn't know about it, and I wound up one of those people who would look for chairs with arms so I could lower myself in because my spine hurt so badly. I realized that I didn't want to just drag myself through life. I wanted to, live it completely. So I found my way to our first speaker, Dr. Cameron, who treated me aggressively, and thanks to him, I have my life back. And I make that point because years later, when Maria Bakai here of the Wildlife Foundation on Fire Island came to me about placing this on the property, I immediately knew the importance of this mission because I knew the severity of the disease. Now, we can't talk about the four-poster on Fire Island or even in New York State without talking about Maria Bakai for a minute. Though many people have given much to the cause, she has been the force. It began when she was concerned about the wildlife. When there were too many deer eating up the shrubs and causing disease, there was a call to cull the deer, to get rid of them, to shoot them. And some go-ahead was given, and hunters were allowed with arrows even, and it was rather brutal. So Maria decided she was going to see to it that the deer got darted with contraceptives. But she had to figure out which were the males, which were the females, which were ovulating, which were not, and most difficult, which one she'd already darted and where and when. So by going out till 5 or 6 in the morning, learning their habits, she came to know most of the deer on one end of Fire Island by name and carried out this project. In short, she became the Jane Goodall of deer on Fire Island. That is Maria Bakai. She is the one who's done unbelievable job. More importantly, when the relevance here is that when the issue went from too many deer to too many ticks, she found the four-poster. So what is this miracle, and where did it come from? It was devised to stop an infestation coming across the border of some pathogens in ticks in Texas, and it was very effective. It works with a silo that's filled with corn, and the corn becomes bait. They come down into a little tray there. The deer go to have corn, and they rub against these rollers, which gives them a ticicide. So one of the great benefits of this is also the environmental benefit that prior to this, communities were using broadcast spraying. But this targets the vector exactly so that the amount of insecticide used is 1/1500th of what was used when there was broadcast spraying. And on top of that, it doesn't merely repel ticks, it kills them. So then as the deer roam about their territory, and they are territorial, they effectively become vacuums that when the ticks come on, they're destroyed. So the end result is that you have an area where the level of ticks is almost as if there were no deer there, a natural level. So what people always ask, what about the ticicide? Well, you can't. It's a small amount. It's very benign. It's a category 4, which is a very low level. It's been approved in 660 products that we use. We put it on our dogs for flea and tick collars and many other things. Oh, by the way, will degrade within 10 to 13 days on the deer, and it does not make it to the ground. The results. What have been the results? This came to my yard because of a study done by Cornell and the Department of Environmental Conservation in New York. They would drag to see how many ticks there were in the vicinity. And in the first year alone, the number of deer ticks dropped by 83%. This increased as the tick stays longer, and it also decreased the other ticks, though that is a longer time period. So what is our object here now? We're here not just to secure it for our community, but for all the big communities. Because at this point, our biggest problem is that we are far too dependent on the whims of various individuals in the bureaucracies. Now, I know the word bureaucracy is a bit of a pejorative, and there have been excellent allies and excellent scientists and people who have advocated for us and done a great job helping us. But at the end of the day, it's becoming a question of who we know, who we can get allied with in order to have this. So every year, we have to reapply to the Department of Conservation and the National Seashore, and every year they find some reason, some fault, some problem. It's like everyone's heard the saying that the perfect is the enemy of the good, but in this case it's worse, or the ally of the bad. And that's what we've been facing in trying to get this perpetually reinstated. So every year they find a reason to delay. They call for meetings, more data, more clarification, better studies. A couple of years ago, they said that it was bad because the corn wasn't nutritious enough for the deer. Now it's presumably bad because it makes the deer too fertile. Never mind, the Parks Department got the job of darting the deer that Maria was doing for $7,000, and were paid $200,000 to do it. And now, with all this money from taxpayers, they're complaining that it's the corn feed that's making the deer too populous. So what we need is broad support for a widespread adoption of this technology so that once it's there, they can't stop it. It becomes too popular and too institutionalized. So what can everyone here do? Inform local officials, particularly health officials. They are very receptive and very helpful with this. They're very data-oriented, and it was our lifesaver in Fair Harbor on Fire Island with the health official Eileen O'Neill. Or set up a foundation like we did and get this into your community. We have brochures that can help you, guide you, and we will help you. The more localities that get it, the more we can get to federal and state laws. Now, I've mentioned the names of a few people that made this happen in our community, and that's because that's what it takes to get here. Extraordinary efforts by extraordinary people. They not only showed us what's possible, but they've really done the hardest part for us. So now it's our turn to take up the mantle and bring this to state and local governments and insist that this environmentally sound public health benefit is in every community that needs it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. So there exists a technology that has a high degree of efficacy in controlling ticks. And if you can control the ticks, you can control the disease. And that is a great segue to our next speaker, Jill Auerbach. Jill has been steadfast in her efforts to study ticks and learn how to control them. She is the founder of an organization that is centered in Dutchess County called stopticks.org, right? And I would encourage everybody to visit that website. So, Jill, I'll turn the podium over to you.
Thank you very much for being here today. It's wonderful to see everybody. By the way, if you want to remember the name of our website, I'm going to turn around. Okay, also the chairperson of the Hudson Valley Lyme Disease Association. There are some others here, Rachel Dedillion and Pat Smalley, that are here and join me today. As well, we have started a Dutchess County Legislative Tick Task Force that's been in existence for over a decade now, and our main thing is to look at, hey guys, what's the problem? Well, it's the ticks, of course, isn't it? So this has been a really long ignored field of science. So now that I just said that, and by the way, I just wanted to say there are very few devices that are around to do something about the tick numbers, but this is one of them. And one deer being treated by this can eliminate as much as 1 million ticks in the next generation. Just one, because each tick lays 2,000 to 3,000 eggs. There's also deer feeders, there are also bait boxes for the mice, which are the main reservoirs, but this field of science has gotten like no funding. So anyway, I am one of you who was undiagnosed. For me, it was over a decade until I thought my life was over. As bad as the physical symptoms, the worst were those that affected my mind. I was emotionally irritable, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and couldn't remember or think. I did not know if a stamp went on the right or the left side of an envelope. Always driving a stick shift, when one day I stepped on the clutch instead of the brake, and I could not understand why the car was not slowing down, and I was on 684 in heavy traffic. It was really scary. I had to leave my employment, and a year later was finally diagnosed. Yay, 2 aspirins in the morning, and I'd be better, or so I thought. After 9 months of antibiotic treatment, way beyond the IDSA guidelines, I was finally able to return to work, a productive human being again. It was so difficult, not just for me, but for my family, and it changed much of our lives. Still now, I awake each morning to find out if I can think clearly or if I'm in a Lyme fog with a hurting body. Although everyone agrees upon the urgency of early treatment, too many of us end up with chronic disease due to delays in our diagnosis and treatment. It is the most prevalent vector-borne disease in the entire United States. Many tens of thousands of people every single year are reported ill, and due to underreporting of these people are just the tip of the iceberg. Additionally, when we think about so many, the CDC itself admits that up to 20% are left with lasting symptoms after treatment, and of course, ILADS believes it's much higher than that. The cost of the disease is staggering. Insurance, doctor bills, loss of productivity at work, costs of schooling sick children at home by taxpayers, unemployment, and even disability. As sick people lose their ability to function physically, intellectually, and emotionally, these additional stresses often lead to the breakup of families. As a matter of fact, I just received an email that says the following, quote, "The fact that there has been no agreement of diagnosis, treatment, insurance coverage, and a host of other issues leads me to believe our government is not interested in solving the evil that is robbing the vitality and productivity of our citizens, as well as bankrupting families. I also don't see any of the major foundations interested in prevention or a cure. We'd rather cure malaria in Africa." And then she gasped, "Can you give me any answers to the logic or for any of the above?" End quote. The science of Lyme and tick-borne disease is not yet answered. And the nasty fight goes on, hurting patients, hurting the few physicians who are willing to risk their very livelihood and are under attack for the humanity of treating sick patients. People are sick, and the IDSA turns their backs on them by publishing guidelines that deny the existence of chronic Lyme. Now I ask you, is this first do no harm? Of course not. In over 35 years of Lyme disease, the plight of us, the plight of patients, has not improved. We still don't even have a reasonable diagnostic test. The only thing that has happened in those years are tick numbers have increased dramatically, spread geographically, and infected humans and other animals with a multitude of virulent pathogens. Each year, it seems another is discovered, such as the most recent, which is called Borrelia miyamotoi, a member of the relapsing fever group. What is frightening is this is the first known tick-borne disease infectious to humans where the mother tick passes this organism to some of the 2,000 to 3,000 eggs that she lays, hatching tiny, almost invisible larvae, which look like a speck of dust to the human eye. Previously, there was no concern about these minuscule and so numerous larvae. Only a small fraction of them survived to become nymphs, the stage from which most of us pick up Lyme and other tick-borne diseases. So what's concerning is you can't see them, they're very numerous, and we know they now carry disease. People may be infected with Borrelia miyamotoi, but there is no diagnostic test for it. Discovered in the United States more than a decade ago by Dr. Derlin Fish, our government refused funding for him to develop a diagnostic test, as there was no proof that it caused illness in humans. Well, guess what? It wasn't until Russia proved human illness about 2 years ago that a cent of funding was spent in the United States. So I ask you, could this Borrelia miyamotoi be the reason some patients test negative and or have chronic symptoms? We don't know. Ticks are worldwide. Ticks do not discriminate. So it could be you or your loved one next. You do not even end up with immunity from Lyme disease, so you can get it over and over again. So by simply taking an innocent walk, going on vacation, or visiting a park, etc., you can be nabbed over and over again, be treated for years, finally get well, and get sick again. So what can we do, and why aren't people being protected from infection and reinfection? Well, what's the problem, guys? Well, it's the ticks, of course. When rabies was a problem, an oral bait vaccine was developed for the animals that were carriers. When gypsy moths were destroying trees, pheromones were used to confuse them and disrupt their ability to find each other so they could mate, etc., etc., etc. I ask you, are the trees more important than we are? The government must think so. Did you know there was research that would have prevented ticks from being able to remain attached to us? Did you know that? Yes, drop off so they could not transmit any disease. Did you know the NIH discontinued funding this promising answer? Yeah, ridiculous. Do you know a pittance is spent on tick research to protect us? Ticks, these cesspools of infection, are not even needed in the food chain. So I ask, why has nothing been done to stop these ticks? Research is needed in this ignored field of science. It's time, and the time is now. Scream loud and clear. Demand an answer. Call your congressmen and senators and write to the governor. Stay involved. Please sign the petition over at the table here, which would require the destructive IDSA guidelines be included, to be reviewed and forced to include all of the science, not being just one-sided. This is our fight. Stop the ticks. Stop the disease. I look forward to the day when children can roll in the grass and jump in the leaves as I once was able to do. They should not get sick by merely going outside to play. Thank you very much.
When I got involved in caring for patients with Lyme disease 25 years ago or so, I perceived that taking care of patients with Lyme disease, especially chronic Lyme disease, was very dangerous for the physician. About 10 or 15 years ago, at a meeting of the Westchester County Medical Society, I happened to sit down at dinner with a gentleman named Doug Najary. We got to talking, and I found him simpatico. And when the time came around that I needed a healthcare law attorney, I engaged Doug. And Doug has extensive background in law, including criminal law. He worked for the DA's office in Brooklyn, and he has helped counsel me through the latest harrowing ordeal with the OPMC for myself. And it's my pleasure to introduce Doug Najari.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is heartwarming to see so many people turn out for such an incredible cause. And I've seen some T-shirts. I've seen T-shirts that say, "This is a political disease. Keep your hands off my doctor." And it is a political fight. It's become a political fight. And people like Ken and Dan Cameron are fighting for their professional lives, fighting for their livelihood. And why is it? Why does it have to be like that? I want to ask you a question. I want to ask you what you think of a system of justice where the judge, the jury, and the prosecutor are all handpicked by the government. What do you think of a system of justice where there are no rules of evidence? What do you think of a system of justice where the charges are public but the trial is secret? I'm not talking about the trials that we give to our enemy combatants or people who are being held on Guantanamo, but this is the system of justice that your doctors face. And it's a system of justice that our legislators have put in place in New York State. I'll tell you up front, I represent physicians. I've done so for 15 years. I was a prosecutor for many years before that, and I call myself a recovering prosecutor. But this is the system that we deal with for physicians. They have far fewer rights than the rest of us have in any other venue, in any other jurisdiction. And it's troubling, and it keeps me up at night. Or one other point, a system of justice where if the government doesn't like the verdict, they can appeal it. If the doctor's exonerated, the government can appeal it, try again, get another sanction, get a second bite of the apple. The rest of us are protected from that sort of intrusion from our government. Our doctors are not. Our physicians are under attack. They're under attack primarily, I have to say, from each other. Physicians are turning on each other, and there is a civil war in the Lyme community. Physicians are pointing fingers at each other, they're turning on each other, and they're manipulating the government to snuff out their competition. They're sabotaging one another, and many physicians are unwilling to accept the fact that we see in every other area of medicine, that the art and the science of medicine is changing, that there is something called chronic Lyme, that it can be treated with long-term antibiotics, and this is no secret. And I don't know why this fight exists. I don't know why the government continues to lend its credibility to those who will try to abuse the government to get them to do their bidding for them. So here in New York, our physicians are scrutinized by the New York State Department of Health's Office of Professional Medical Conduct. They investigate, and they're responsible for investigating approximately 8,000 complaints a year. And they're required to investigate every complaint they get, from sublime to ridiculous. So every complaint they get that comes in against a Dan Cameron, that comes in against somebody like Ken, they have to investigate. And what does that do to the physician? It is excruciating. It is expensive to defend himself or herself. The physician has to walk around with this cloud over his or her head without ever knowing, am I going to lose my license? Am I going to be sanctioned? Am I going to be thrown out of managed care? What's to become of me? It's a horrible system. It's a system we're stuck with for now. A little bit of history. In 2000, you heard about Joe Boroscano, was charged by the Office of Professional Medical Conduct with misconduct, essentially for treating patients who had chronic Lyme with long-term antibiotics. And while he was exonerated on many of the charges, he wasn't on others, unfortunately. And what they couldn't get with the left, they got with the right. And our doctors have to be careful. And what OPMC said, if you read that decision carefully, is that it's okay to treat chronic Lyme with antibiotics. It's okay, so long as you have a diagnosis, so long as you follow up appropriately, so long as you document properly. So OPMC and other government agencies, we see this in other states, will come in and they'll say, you know what, that's fine. You treated with antibiotics, it's not really what we're looking at. So it's a 1-2 punch, and if they're not going to get the physicians on treating them with antibiotics, they're going to get them on their documentation, they're going to get them on their follow-up, they're going to get them on failing to document a differential diagnosis, and they've got to dot their I's, they've got to cross their T's. 2005, New York State Department of Health actually came out with a position paper. And they said that although there was no direct reference to treatment of chronic Lyme with long-term antibiotics, they said that we have to give credence to alternative treatments. And they recognize the need to consider alternative therapies without, as I said, actually mentioning long-term antibiotics. So in the end, we do have change in some respects, but for our doctors, nothing has changed. Their colleagues continue to file complaints. The government continues to investigate. Our physicians continue to live with this crippling legal burden. And in the end, it has an effect on every one of you. Because in the end, here's what they want to do. They want it to have a chilling effect on the way that you're treated. They don't want chronic Lyme to be recognized. They don't want people like Ken and Dan to be treating it with long-term antibiotics. And they want to scare them back into what they would call the mainstream. It's an intimidation tactic, and the government is allowing itself to be used that way. And there are many good people there. Don't get me wrong. There are people who do want to do the right thing. But the Office of Professional Medical Conduct has an obligation to investigate every complaint that they get every year, all 8,000. So every time they get a complaint, the doctors put through the ringer, and it is literally a ringer. I'm going to give you some numbers. In 2011 alone, there were about 7,500 complaints filed with OPMC. 474 doctors actions were brought against them. 407 of those 474 were disciplined, and 185 had their licenses revoked. Revoked. Will not practice medicine again. Done. Now, how does this compare with other states? California, 2011, 19 physicians were actually charged, 18 were sanctioned, and only six were revoked, as opposed to New York, 185 lost their licenses. So it is, as I said, there are many decent people there. It is a political organization. It is not physician-friendly. There is an anti-physician bias, and it's a dangerous place to be. These complaints are coming from other physicians. They're coming from insurers who don't want to pay for long-term antibiotics. And quite frankly, they're coming from other states. There are so few physicians available who are willing to treat chronic Lyme this way with long-term antibiotics that people will come in from other states. Ironically, from Rhode Island and other places where chronic Lyme is a big issue and Lyme disease is a big problem. And what our law says here in New York is that we can only treat patients, or doctors can only treat patients in New York. And it's the location of the patient that controls. So if a patient comes and seeks treatment from New Hampshire, from Maine, from Florida, or from God knows where, and the physician wants to accommodate that patient by seeing him or her once or twice and then following up by telephone, we've had other states tell us, you know what, Najari? That's the unlawful practice of medicine, and your client may be guilty of a felony because he's not licensed to practice in this state. So we need to know what their tactics are. And in many respects, as I said, there are many good people. In other respects, they're the enemy. And here's what they do. They will interview patients. They'll interview members of the doctor's office staff. They'll review medical records. And what can we do? You as patients may be contacted by the government. You're under absolutely no obligation to talk to the government under any circumstance, whether they're knocking on your door because they want to know how their doctor's treating you, or whether they're knocking on your door for any other reason. And you can very politely say, you know what? Thanks, but no thanks. I love my doctor. Not interested in talking to you. Close the door. Let him go. You have no obligation to cooperate with them. As far as the physicians who are in the audience, your office staffs have to know the same thing, that they're not obligated to talk to the government. They're not obligated to give them records on demand. If somebody comes in from the Department of Health and says, I want 3 charts, nothing doing. Your office staffs have to be educated. There is no state agency that disciplines receptionists. Receptionists can very well say to somebody from the Department of Health or any other law enforcement agency, you know what, give me your card. I'll let the doctor know you were here, but you're not welcome to stay. We have patients to treat, and invite them to leave. They don't have a right to sit in your office, and at that point they'll be trespassing. And I have yet to meet a government investigator that I can't chase out of somebody's office. So That's what we need to do. But the doctors need to protect themselves. They need to document their records like their life depends on it, because it very well might. And very simply, and I know that most of us are patients here, so I don't want to belabor this. Subjective, objective symptoms, your assessment, your plan, a really good articulation of your differential diagnosis, and why is it that Lyme disease is either your diagnosis or your working diagnosis or your rule-out diagnosis. It's one thing to have it all in your head, and you can be a great doctor, but if you don't have it on paper, they're going to shoot you in the kneecaps. So document like your life depends on it. Document the patient's prior history, the family history, the therapies that have been tried and failed. Make every effort to get prior records from prior treating physicians. It's important that you talk to your patients about the nature of the therapy that you're recommending, and that they know that this is not the only therapy, that there are some people that don't necessarily recognize that it's efficacious, that it works. Put it all on paper, so that when the government comes knocking on your door and they're reviewing your records, the same way the IRS is going to go over your tax returns if you're audited, when they go over your records, they're going to know that you did a good evaluation, that you had a reason for coming to the diagnosis that you did, that you discussed the treatment alternatives with the patient, and this is what the patient chose, his choice or her choice. And you laid out the options. This is the course that they chose to follow. What we see the Department of Health doing many times is looking at ongoing treatment and say, you know what, that's fine, doctor, you made a good diagnosis, but how did you follow up? We don't know how this patient reacted to antibiotics. We don't know if he or she improved. We don't know if the patient had any adverse effects, or whether you discovered any contraindications to antibiotic therapy along the way. So documentation is everything. Doctors have to protect themselves, and you've got to protect your doctors. You need to be aware, as I said, of the state's tactics, to know your rights, to know that you don't have to talk to anyone that you don't want to talk to. And I would encourage you that if the Department of Health or any other governmental agency comes knocking at your door and asking about your doctor, give them a call. Tell them what's going on. None of this is secret, and nobody can tell you we're with the government. You can't tell anybody we're here. It's absolutely appropriate to call your doctor, let them know you've had a visit, let them know that that Big Brother's watching, because Big Brother is watching. As I said, it's important for doctors to educate their staffs and let them know that their office staffs don't have an obligation to talk to them. I call it the Sopranos rule. If anybody shows up at your door, and I can't tell you who to talk to or who not to speak to, but what I tell my kids, what I tell my clients is don't say nothing to nobody, okay? And when you're dealing with the government, I think that is often the best thing to do. There are things that physicians can do to protect themselves. They can engage in asset protection. I guess that's a talk for another day. But for physicians, it's important to communicate with their patients, to let them know why it is they're recommending the treatment that they're recommending, and more importantly, to communicate with the patient's primary care physicians. Communicate with them. Let them know what you're doing. Let them know why you're trying long-term antibiotics. Send them a copy of the studies that back this up. So if there's good communication, you're going to get fewer people complaining. What we've seen is time and again, patients will go back for a regular checkup to their primary care physician, and the primary care physician will hear long-term antibiotics, chronic Lyme. What are you talking about? The guy's a quack. And that's because there's a lack of education. There is ignorance on the part of many physicians and on the general public. So for physicians, talk to the primary care physicians, educate them, let them know about Lyme, let them know about long-term treatments for Lyme, and that'll go a long, long way toward keeping your practice healthy and happy. And as far as each of you as patients or as members of the general public, we can advocate. I mean, this is New York. This is the Empire State, okay? The Empire State. We are supposed to have the best and the brightest here. The finest doctors, the best institutions, the best labs, the finest place to get research done, the finest place to get new treatments. But what are we seeing? We're seeing Rhode Island, California, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, all ahead of us. All of those states have enacted laws to do one of two things. 5 of the 6, if not all 6, have enacted laws that will allow physicians to treat chronic Lyme. They've defined it in a statute. Will allow physicians to treat them with long-term antibiotics so long as they've documented their diagnosis and they follow the patient appropriately. And I think it's Rhode Island that actually has moved ahead of everybody else and requires certain insurance coverage under certain circumstances. So advocate. Call your legislators, as you've heard before. Call your state senators, your assemblymen. Write to the governor and stay involved in organizations like this. And the best thing you can do is to support your local doctor. Thank you very much.
All I can say is Doug has been a good man to have in one's corner. Thank you again. Our next speaker is someone I had the pleasure of seeing a video that was presented at the Tick-Borne Diseases Alliance Gala at Chelsea Piers a week or two back, I guess. And that's Megan Harrison, who's a young person who was, how should you say it, at the top of her game, and became very seriously sidetracked with a serious case of Lyme, and has fought back, and is shortly, I hope, to go off to college. So, Megan, where are you? Please come forward. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Megan Harrison, and thank you. I used to be normal before tick-borne diseases took over. However, I had my knees drained several times in 2003, wore a knee brace, and had several MRIs. I also saw a pediatric migraine specialist for my insufferable migraines. Looking back, I realize now that my migraine started after I had a tick bite that was treated for only a few weeks. But these pains were such a normal part of my life that I didn't realize how abnormal they were, and my doctors didn't connect them with Lyme disease. November 2008 changed my life forever. During swim season of my sophomore year, I began having constant nausea, which made eating incredibly difficult. I became so fatigued, it was a struggle to just pull myself through the water. Over winter break, I decided to quit the varsity team so my body could recover for rowing season in the spring, which was my main sport. Then in January, I lost my short-term memory overnight. School tests were impossible since everything I learned disappeared after 2 hours. It was so bad that when I got home from school, I had no idea that I'd been there that day. I had to rely solely on my notes to do my homework at night. Even with my friends, 2 hours after lunch, I had no idea who I'd eaten with or what we talked about. They constantly repeated conversations to me. I endured 6 months of amnesia-erased memories, even of the prom. I became a guinea pig to cardiologists, gastroenterologists, and neurologists as they ran countless tests. My symptoms began to increase, and I started having insomnia and stabbing pains that would double me over in my abdomen. While the doctors tried to figure out what was wrong with me, I was given some very odd advice. I was told that my gallbladder should be removed and that I should go back to rowing since the only thing that was wrong with me was that I missed my sport. All the doctors and specialists kept trying to figure out what was wrong with me. My mom was doing her own research too because we were getting nowhere. When she came up with Lyme disease as a possible explanation because it linked all my symptoms together, she suggested this might be considered. But instead, the doctors refused to test me because I did not have the classic arthritis symptoms. In May, I was finally tested and diagnosed with Lyme disease. We had been to the great academic hospitals in our region, but it was my family doctor who diagnosed me. When the test came back, he called and said there was no doubt about it. I had Lyme. After being a lab rat for so long, I had answers, but still no memory. In July of 2009, my memory returned after IV antibiotics, and then I was pulled off all treatment. I began fainting, having black spots in my vision, and word finding became extremely difficult. However, I was still able to complete 2-year-long courses in August. By September, I dealt with encephalitis, 2 days of blindness, and a month-long migraine. Sleeping only 10 to 12 hours per week, I was a zombie for months. Acupuncture was the highlight of my week, relieving some pain. During this time, my life was not my own. Rowing, modeling, and robotics, 3 of my favorite activities, were impossible. My peers talked about school, boys, and colleges, but my expertise was in needles, nausea, and pain. For the longest time, I dreamed of being normal again. I began writing a silly teen novel, and my mom suggested that one of my characters be a Lyme patient. But my imagination was a safe haven during this time, especially when I was bedridden. I wanted all my characters to be healthy and normal because that was the only way I could live a normal teen life. Now I realize that normalcy is overrated, but when you feel so out of place, you just want to be Clark Kent, not Superman. During this journey, I had hope. Even at the worst, God gave me peace. Throughout this illness, I believed God had a purpose for my life and that good could come from all the devastation. My path to stay positive became reviewing my daily blessings and helping others, which brought about amazing opportunities and gave my life purpose. In 2010, the president of Montco Lyme asked me to run a Lyme walk for youth. And since many Lyme youth couldn't walk a mile, I envisioned a catwalk instead, and the Limelight Fashion Show was born. Lyme youth were the spirit of the show. They strutted on the runway along with professional models. For some, it was the first time meeting others who understood what they were going through. I wish you could meet the brave Lyme youth who modeled in the fashion show. They truly know the meaning of the word courage. I'd like to briefly share a few of their stories since their symptoms are quite different. What they all have in common is how much they've lost. Like me, many of them went undiagnosed for a long time or they were misdiagnosed. One of the models in last year's show had been wheelchair-bound and couldn't speak for 2 years. After being treated for tick-borne diseases, she modeled and spoke at the fashion show. You would never have guessed she had been so ill, except that she had missed a few years of school. A friend of mine with tick-borne diseases was too sick to go away to college, so he decided to attend a local community college. He did well at first, but then his health really started going downhill. He would walk towards a building and his legs would simply give out on him. He would have to wait until he had the strength to move again. His brain became foggy and his grades dropped to Fs. Sadly, he had to withdraw from school. Now that he is finally seeing a good Lyme doctor, he is improving, but he has a long road ahead of him. He spent months flat on his back when he is supposed to be in the prime of his life. Julia Wagner runs the Pennsylvania Lyme Resource Network, and her entire family has experienced the devastation of Lyme disease and tick-borne diseases. Mrs. Wagner is really smart and a great communicator. She had her own consulting company where she worked with CEOs all over the world. Before her Lyme and Babesia were diagnosed and treated, she became so ill that she could not string a coherent sentence together. All 3 of her children lost their second language, which their dad spoke regularly at home. Her daughter had hypersensitive skin. At times, she couldn't wear any clothes at all and had to lie in bed and suffer. Her youngest son began dragging his one foot behind him. After being treated for tick-borne diseases, their major symptoms went away. And they had a documented increase in their IQs of 26 and 16 points. It makes me wonder how many children that are diagnosed with ADHD or special needs actually might have tick-borne diseases that could be treated. One young girl around 10 years old was perfectly normal. She suddenly began having psychiatric problems. She was unable to be in school, and her mom couldn't even take her shopping because she'd create a scene. She saw a psychiatrist who ran a battery of tests. Lyme disease was the only one that came back positive. She treated it, even though she didn't think Lyme was the culprit of the symptoms. However, after treatment with antibiotics, the girl was perfectly normal again. Some kids I've met have suffered with seizures. One was having them constantly throughout the day. After showing up at various hospital emergency rooms, the hospital personnel thought it was child abuse. It turned out to be Lyme and other tick-borne diseases causing her problems, and after treatment by a knowledgeable Lyme doctor, her seizures are gone, but the accusations devastated her family. Another model in the show last year was wheelchair-bound. She was misdiagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis and was given immunosuppressants, which are contraindicated for Lyme disease. When the mom decided to take her daughter off them because they were not helping, She was threatened with child abuse by the specialist her daughter was seeing. So the girl remained on the wrong medication for an extra year. Finally, she saw a knowledgeable specialist and was diagnosed with tick-borne diseases. She is now improving, but her joints were so severely damaged from taking the wrong medication that she may never be able to walk again. Before tick-borne diseases, she was a talented dancer. Unfortunately, these stories are not isolated, and tick-borne disease symptoms are quite diverse. I've heard the discouragement in kids' voices when they are suffering and they are being told it's all in their head. I don't know anyone that wants to make up the symptoms of Lyme disease, especially not children. All they want to do is get well, and instead of helping them, some doctors attack their credibility or tell them they should see a psychiatrist. It is so sad that youth suffer because of misdiagnoses and inadequate treatment from practitioners that don't understand Lyme disease. So much of this suffering is unnecessary and costly too. Homebound students may require tutors, and other Lyme youth I know have been sent to special needs schools. Taxpayers are footing the bill. Good tick surveillance and public warnings are needed. Many people still have no idea how horrific the symptoms can be if they are not caught right away. We need to raise awareness and help prevent these diseases in the first place. We also have to educate doctors. The new research that has come out in the last 10 years is changing the way these emerging diseases are being treated. Doctors need to be trained to look for the right symptoms and to know how to treat these diseases effectively. There is so much that can be done to help the youth. I will continue to work to prevent others from going through all the misery that tick-borne diseases put me through. When you think about whether or not to take action, remember the injustice children of these diseases suffer. Remember their pain. Remember their unfulfilled potential. Never give up the cause. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. It's truly inspirational. And good luck at University of Tulsa, Oklahoma, right? Not too many ticks out there? Good, okay. Our next speaker is also a young person who has dealt with Lyme, and I'm sure I'll try not to mispronounce the name. Ariana Sierz-Putowski, is that close? Good enough? Please come up and welcome Ariana.
Thanks. I don't know if I was shocked by the unexpected and sudden onset of debilitating pain, or the Lyme actually rewiring my brain on its own, but I became a shell of my former self. The self that I was just starting to blossom into. The self that I never actually got to know. Putting caps on the range of mental states and emotions I've gone through with words like depression, anxiety, dissociation, or rage could not even begin to articulate what I went through. But I can't speak in past tense because to this day I am still fighting this disease. The symptoms have varied on a daily basis. The intensity of brain fog I experienced the first half of 2012 has left me with only scattered memories of those 6 months. They serve as a reminder of everything I missed out on. I remember lying in bed for weeks feeling absolutely nothing but pain. Lyme has affected every part of my body. Symptoms include incessant insomnia alternating with hypersomnia, joint, muscle, nerve, and bone pain, dizziness, heart palpitations, night sweats, chills, neurological, and cognitive problems. When I was younger, thinking about what my life would be like at 16 was nowhere near the harsh reality it is now. I could have never pictured this world of bodily torment. I expected to be happy and having fun, going out with friends, exploring new places, meeting new people, doing well in school, participating in clubs and sports, and just doing the things that I love. Sadly, these things that any teenager would wish for were snatched from my hands before I had even the slightest grasp on them. Because when I was 14 years old, I unknowingly contracted Lyme disease, which without proper early recognition or treatment was left to fester inside of me for months, leading to chronic Lyme. In the summer of 2011, I attended a sleepaway camp in Lyme-endemic Litchfield, Connecticut. It was only the second week into my month-long stay at camp when I was suddenly hit with flu-like symptoms. The nurse told me it was going around, and she gave me ibuprofen and decongestants. During my second week of these flu symptoms, I got sudden sharp pains at my legs. When I returned to the nurse, she looked me up and down and then promptly dismissed my leg pain, blaming it on my unsupportive shoes. By the last week of camp, the flu-like symptoms had finally subsided, but the leg pain never fully went away. While I was making friendship bracelets and writing my goodbye notes to the girls in my cabin, I began to feel the same sharp pains now running down the middle of my forearms and wrists. From the months between my time at summer camp until that December, I would experience widespread migrating pain that would come and go, and typically last from several seconds to several minutes. I also began to have constant headaches and increased fatigue. I was feeling much more worn out by simple daily tasks than ever before. One morning in mid-December, I woke up unable to put my feet on the ground and stand without overwhelming leg pains. The doctor told me that I had a muscle virus and sent me home. A week later, after doing more research on my symptoms, I went back again asking for a Lyme test. When it came back negative, she told me she had no idea what it was. By the beginning of January, I was experiencing full-blown Lyme symptoms. I visited a doctor at a well-known hospital hoping for some insight, but he had no idea what could be causing my symptoms. He ordered blood tests, and several days later, he called to say I had Lyme disease and prescribed 3 weeks of doxycycline. A few days after that, he called again to say that the second test was negative, so I could stop taking antibiotics. My mom tried to tell him that the blood tests were not definitive and that the diagnosis was clinical, but he wasn't listening. He suggested I see a pediatric rheumatologist. We found several Lyme-literate rheumatologists, but no one could see me for over 3 months. We kept searching for a doctor who understood Lyme, and it wasn't until May 2012 that we found one. I was so happy that we found an amazing doctor who listened to me and was able to diagnose and treat me with an aggressive regimen of oral antibiotics for Lyme disease and babesiosis, a common co-infection. My doctor is actually here today, Dr. Cameron. I learned quickly that there was no easy fix for this disease. Every few months, I've had to switch medications due to side effects, insurance denial, or ineffectiveness. I missed 52 days of school last year and was in danger of not moving on to the 11th grade. My teachers couldn't understand how I could be in school for several days and then out for a week, over and over again. On the days when I miraculously dragged myself outside and stumbled into class, I was nothing but a body in a seat. I barely remember what happened during the days that I was in school. Everything felt like a dream I couldn't wake up from. I felt like a ghost, somberly stumbling around. No quality of life, alive but not living. Neurologic and cognitive effects of Lyme are also a daily struggle for me. I have severe brain fog much of the time. These effects feel like a veil is shrouding all of my thoughts and memories. Sometimes I can feel all of my thoughts scrambling around in my head, but I'm unable to focus in on any one of them, no matter how hard I try. I have a very hard time retaining information or recalling something I just heard or recently learned. Frustrated because no matter how hard I struggle, I cannot excel in school like I had before I became ill. I feel like a miserable failure, and it's hard not to be down on myself every second, but I'm trying to be kind to myself and remember that it's not my fault. I'm sad that the things that used to be a breeze in daily life are now the biggest obstacles, and I'm sad that the things that I already had difficulty with are now amplified to a degree that I had no idea could exist. I'm sad that there's nothing I can do to alleviate my symptoms. I'm sad that friendships have passed because of this. It's been over a year now since that awful week in December, and almost 2 years since it all began. At the end of 2012 school year, after starting antibiotic treatment, I was able to pull myself together enough to pass all of my exams with honors, but it was an incredible feat that I almost didn't pull off. I had high hopes going into this academic year. I envisioned a year filled with extracurricular activities and creative pursuits, trips to colleges and plans with friends. All I got were doctor's appointments and prescriptions. By March of 2013, my family and I had to face the reality that I wasn't well enough to continue going to school. We applied for home instruction, and a month later, I was assigned several teachers who have been coming to my home and helping me to complete the 11th grade. It's not only hard for the people at school and the people I meet to understand what I'm going through, but it is hard for my family and close friends too. I appreciate their sympathy and well wishes, but no one except those who have experienced chronic Lyme could be able to relate or understand that I'm not just going to get better in a week or so. Having this chronic illness has made me frightened to speak to my friends about what I'm going through. I don't want that to scare them or to be seen as the sick friend, but I also don't want them to think that I'm totally okay and I'm able to do normal things when I'm not. Most times I end up saying little to nothing about myself. I feel isolated and different from everyone I know. It truly hurts sometimes when people comment on how good I look because it reminds me that I am battling an invisible illness. However, through it all, having this disease has heightened my awareness and compassion for others' well-being. It has inspired me to want to do research for Lyme, specifically for the cognitive and neurological effects, because I have been so greatly affected by those aspects. I believe that there is a need for more research and a better understanding of what this disease can do to your mind. This rally is so important because Lyme disease needs to be recognized for what it is, a worldwide epidemic that is not going away. I've been told that it is all in my head, that I should see a therapist, and that there is no such thing as late persistent Lyme. Untold numbers of people will remain undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, or completely ignored by their healthcare professionals. A bullseye rash is not the only sign you've been infected with Lyme disease. As I found out, education is so important and cannot be stressed enough. For if you catch Lyme disease in its early stages, you won't end up like me or worse, like so many others. Patients should not have to fight to get treated. Patients should not have to be demeaned and written off by doctor after doctor. Recognition of the physical, mental, emotional, neurological, spiritual, financial, social, educational, and employment detriments of Lyme and other tick-borne infections is long overdue. It is not all in our heads, it is under our skin.
Thank you so much, Ariana. Our next speaker is Andrea Gato, MD, a rheumatologist from Basking Ridge, New Jersey, who is a pioneer in the field of Lyme disease and one of the founding members of the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. She is one of the physicians who understands the chronic infection, but also that chronic infection can sometimes trigger immune-mediated effects such that antibiotics, although may be necessary, may not be sufficient. And sometimes there are other kinds of treatment interventions in addition to antibiotics or even instead of antibiotics that are necessary. Andrea?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. And I'm actually a rheumatologist, which I know is a kind of an underrepresented field of medicine among Lyme disease. And although I'm not a pediatrician, what I wanted to talk about today was specifically the plight of children who have Lyme disease, specifically in my state, which is New Jersey. And just as an example, although we have so many cases of Lyme in New Jersey, and children, of course, are out there in the woods, et cetera, I saw two children this week, both teenagers, who exemplify what the problem is. One was a young girl who had a known tick bite, and 2 weeks later developed a multitude of symptoms, headaches, fatigue, who, as Megan and Ariana ascribed to, were perfectly fine before, enjoying school, et cetera, absolutely no reason to want to be sick. And the mother of this daughter told me that she went to her pediatrician and she was told that unless her daughter had a swollen knee, that she would not even do a blood test for her for Lyme disease, which is just almost impossible to believe, coming from a state that has the highest rate of Lyme disease and coming from an area that is just, anywhere you drive, there are ticks everywhere. So pediatricians, our contacts with doctors has to change. And the other case I saw was a girl who didn't recount a tick bite but had been on a Girl Scout trip. And 2 weeks later she came in and she had 2 gigantic bullseyes on her back that, textbook, I took pictures of course. And she went to her pediatrician and was also told that it was too early to do a blood test and that she needed to go to a dermatologist. So mother took her to a dermatologist, and believe it or not, she came out of the dermatologist's office with the statement that, well, we're going to do a Lyme titer, but we have to wait for that to come back before we can treat you. So I really feel ground level treatment at pediatricians is in my state, and one of actually the missions this year of iLabs is going to be trying to get better treatment for children with Lyme disease. Thank you. And if it wasn't for the second girl's mother who talked to her friends and also was someone who had chronic Lyme disease years ago, the girl would never have been treated. She just would have went home and said, okay, the rash went away, et cetera, et cetera. So everything you heard today, I agree with, and I'm so happy to have been able to speak after the 2 girls who did such a fabulous job articulating their problems at such a young age. Thank you, Megan and Ariana. But I think we really need a plan, and it's great to write to your congressman, and all of these things are kind of working at the top end. So what I think would be the best thing to do is to try to say you want each one of your cases counted. You want each one of these bites counted. So what I advocate, and I actually brought with me today, is the simple sheet that every Board of Health has. And every time I see a patient, although it's a pain in the neck and everyone has so much paperwork to do today, I fill it out and I write, whatever, patients on medicine, and I make that case counted. And a lot of the labs automatically report now to the local boards of health, but unless we have documentation that your case was treated, that you had a bullseye, that you have symptoms, that your name is there, what county, we're going from the patient movement and the political movement, but we need that actual documentation, which is so easy to do. So I'm going to ask Vanessa if she would take this form. You can fill it out yourself, send it in. They'll keep bugging your doctor like you would not believe until they figure it out. And no doctor, especially in this climate, who treats Lyme disease wants to keep getting faxes from the Board of Health. But if patients take that initiative themselves to fill it out and other doctors fill it out, I really think we'll make so much progress in getting each case counted, getting each bite counted. And I think in that way, when then we write to the congressman and do all those things that definitely are wonderful things to do, they'll see, wow, we have documentations that it's the tip of the iceberg, which they hear. They don't hear every case from Somerset County, Hunterdon County, Morris County, all the areas that I live in. So I would advise everyone, if they could, if your case hasn't been counted by your local Board of Health, go home and do it. It's so easy. It'll take you 20 seconds to fill this form out. And I just want to thank everyone again. That's all I have to say. And I really appreciate everyone coming, and I hope everyone does well in their efforts.
Thank you so much, Andrea. Jeff Christensen just has a brief announcement.
Hi, I'm the guy with the 4 poster, and one thing I forgot to mention is that the Wildlife Foundation, the one that has made this happen on Fire Island, put together a brochure which is excellent for anyone who is seriously interested in trying to put one together in your community or be a serious advocate for the 4 poster. It's a great thing. It's one of the best preventatives, just keep people from getting it in the first place. So these are available to anyone who come up to me, and you can have one. We have what we have here. Thank you.
So here we have a technology that actually works. But it appears there's bureaucratic obstacles, so there needs to be some public pressure to get the deer poster implemented in where it's needed. It's my great pleasure to introduce Pam Weintraub, author of Cure Unknown, science writer, and also is, an editor at Discover Magazine. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Pam for a few words.
Hi there. I'm here really to introduce Dr. Ligner because he's the one who's going to give the big talk. So I just wanted to tell you how I met Ken Ligner. It was in the year 2000, about 13 years ago, and I'd gone to a conference hosted by the Lyme Disease Foundation, and the reason I was there was because I had a child who was very sick. I had a child who had a huge erythema migrans rash. He had swollen knees. He had 8 out of 10 positive bands on his test from LabCorp. He was actually a poster child for the mainstream definition of Lyme disease, except that even though we lived in Chappaqua, New York, and Westchester County in the middle of a tick forest, for 7 years, I couldn't get him diagnosed. And he was so sick. So I was a science journalist, a very skeptical science journalist. I still am a skeptical science journalist, but I had a very sick child, and I had to cross the line and go to this very radical conference to figure out if maybe I didn't have to throw my kid away. You know, maybe I could save him. And when I was in line to get coffee, Dr. Ligner was there. I was telling him the story, and I still remember to this day how upset he got at this story. His face turned all kinds of colors, his whole body changed, and he said to me, and he didn't know who I was. I was just, and in fact I really was just another mother. I hadn't gone there as a journalist at all. And he said to me, I keep scraping people off the floor. And my kid certainly needed to be scraped off the floor. That was my older son. It turned out, since actually he did have a straightforward case of Lyme disease, ultimately he was diagnosed, he was treated, he needed aggressive treatment, but he got better. But where Dr. Ligner really came through in helping us enormously was with my second kid, who had a different presentation of Lyme disease. He just slept all the time. And I didn't want to think he had Lyme disease. The first experience of Lyme disease had been so horrible. I really hoped that this other kid had like anything but Lyme disease. And I actually took him, you know, we went all over trying to figure out what was the matter with him. Even the Lyme doctors told me they didn't think he had Lyme disease. And finally I knew I had to take him to Dr. Ligner, because Dr. Ligner has the most exhaustive, you could almost call it obsessive, except that that kind of obsession is actually what's required to do the job, exhaustive, meticulous way of sorting through every bit of evidence. If he has any doubt, he sends his patients to experts at teaching hospitals all around Manhattan, and he sorts and parses through every little bit of evidence to find every other thing that this could possibly be. And finally, after, you know, it was maybe took him a month to do this with my kid, he finally said to me, he has Lyme disease. And he did in fact prove it. He got other tests that they weren't even controversial tests, but he actually proved he had Lyme disease, and he was then treated for Lyme disease, and he got better from that bout of Lyme disease as a result of this. So I just want to say that this is a doctor that's enormously helped me and my family in being just an extremely meticulous, intelligent, and skeptical diagnostician. And when he comes to Lyme disease, that is what I feel that he brings to bear on it. So without any further ado, here is Dr. Ligner to speak to you.
Thank you so much, Pam. Again, thank you all for being here. Chronic Lyme disease does not exist. There are at least 4 possibilities to explain why a person might hold this view. They can be dumb as bags of rocks, They can be character disordered with excessively rigid thinking and perfect, impenetrable, circular logic. They can be corrupt. They can be sociopaths. One thing is for damn sure. They are truly lousy clinicians. In 1991, the Lyme disease organism Borrelia burgdorferi was grown from the cerebrospinal fluid of my patient, Vicki Logan, at the Centers for Disease Control in Fort Collins, Colorado, despite prior treatment with intravenous antibiotics. Her case made the front page of the New York Times Science Times in August of 1993. In 2012, the EMBERS rhesus monkey study demonstrated conclusively in a primate model closest to man that Lyme infection can persist despite application of intravenous antibiotics, and that animals can be seronegative on antibody studies despite harboring persistent active infection. Lyme disease is the first infectious disease of truly epidemic proportions that emerged hand in hand with another new phenomenon affecting the health of Americans, the penetration of managed care into the health care marketplace. An infection that can be chronic and require a long-term treatment approach does not fit the business model of managed care. Predictable premiums, predictable costs, predictable profit. With managed care, it became feasible to control costs by defining away the chronic infectious aspects of Lyme disease. The Infectious Diseases Society of America Clinical Practice Guidelines for Lyme disease, which appeared in 2000 and 2006, insist that chronic Lyme disease does not exist. These guidelines have proven an effective tool for the health insurance industry to justify denial of reimbursement to patients for treatment that their doctors prescribe. Health plans and insurers and hospitals red flag physicians not conforming to IDSA guidelines for sanctioning and often report them to state boards of medical practice to break their knees. This cowardly and despicable modus operandi is an assault on physicians' most prized possession, professional autonomy and independent medical judgment. Hospitals, once proud and independent entities with endowments and a tradition of charity care, have been captured by the insurance industry and are now often little more than corporate profit centers. Health plans do not want thinking, feeling professionals. They want trained monkeys on a commoditized healthcare assembly line following electronic medical record-prompted algorithms designed to maximize corporate profit. The Hippocratic Oath has now become a quaint anachronism, superseded by a new corporate medical ethic. He who pays the piper calls the tune. IDSA guidelines also serve as a shield for medical neglect, protecting physicians who fail to diagnose or treat adequately patients with chronic Lyme disease who suffer irreversible neurologic injury as a result. In 2008, Connecticut State Attorney General Richard Blumenthal undertook an investigation of the way in which the 2006 IDSA Lyme disease guidelines were developed and found significant flaws in the IDSA's guideline development process and many significant undisclosed conflicts of interest. Attorney General Blumenthal opted to negotiate a settlement with the IDSA with the creation of a Lyme disease review panel to revisit IDSA guidelines. Unfortunately, all panel members were hand-picked by the IDSA, and physicians earning more than $10,000 per year caring for persons with Lyme disease were excluded from the panel. As a result, no physician who actually cared for persons with chronic Lyme disease served on the Lyme review panel. In retrospect, a negotiated settlement instead of litigation was a strategic error because the review was under the complete control of the IDSA. Consequently, no meaningful changes in the guidelines were recommended. The fox was guarding the chicken coop. However, Attorney General Blumenthal's investigation and the presentations of evidence before the IDSA Lyme Disease Review Panel were of some utility. When the Institute of Medicine brought forth its monograph on the development of trustworthy practice guidelines, it pointed to the IDSA Lyme disease guidelines as an example of a guideline development process gone awry. Raymond J. Datweiler, signatory to the 2006 Lyme disease guidelines, which assert that chronic Lyme disease does not exist, states exactly the opposite in a United States patent that issued almost contemporaneously with the IDSA guidelines. Alan C. Steer, signatory to the 2006 IDSA guidelines, which declare chronic Lyme disease does not exist, states exactly the opposite in his published scientific articles and private letters. He sought a correction when his first name was incorrectly listed in the 1993 Logan Science Times article as Robert, and advised the Times his opinion had been incompletely reported and requested it be clarified. According to the Times correction, quote, he says that the small percentage of patients who have inflammation of the brain despite standard antibiotic treatment do have persistent infection, close quote. You cannot have it both ways. When a physician signs on to a practice guideline that directly contradicts their position in their own published peer-reviewed journal articles, statements in the public record, private letters, and in their own United States patents, does that signify medical and scientific misconduct? Additionally, Dr. Datweiler served as an expert consultant to Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield in its defense against the Logan lawsuit, which sought to compel Empire to cover the cost of treatment for chronic Lyme disease. This was not disclosed in the published IDSA 2006 Lyme guidelines. Gary Wormser, lead IDSA Lyme guidelines author, quashed all abstracts on chronic Lyme disease from being accepted at the 2002 International Lyme Conference at the Hyatt Hotel in New York City. When I asked him if the conference was sponsored by the CDC, he adamantly denied it. This was important because if it was known to be a CDC-sponsored event, it might have been possible for legislators to intervene to open up the process. Dr. Wormser either did not know that the event was CDC-sponsored, which seems highly implausible, or he chose to conceal that fact from me. Materials distributed at the time of the conference showed the event was in fact CDC-sponsored. During the conference, whenever attendees attempted to bring up the issue of chronic Lyme disease, they were censored and microphones were shut off so their challenges could not be heard. When a physician acts in a way to suppress expression of opposing views in a government-sponsored international scientific conference, does that constitute an abuse of power? Does it constitute medical and scientific misconduct? Honest science does not need to suppress opposing views. Vicki Logan and other patients sued Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield to cover the cost of needed treatment. The case was settled out of court with terms that were confidential. Whatever the settlement was, it did not include Vicki's right to be reimbursed for the cost of intravenous antibiotic therapy, which she needed. During the litigation, a deposition under oath was taken by Empire Blue Cross Blue Shield Senior Vice President Richard Sanchez. He testified that Empire's accountants, Deloitte and Touche, advised Empire that their review physicians needed to issue more denials in order to increase its profitability. They raised the bar to make it more difficult for patients with costly conditions, such as Lyme disease, to get reimbursement for treatment. His testimony indicated that Empire senior personnel knew that some patients who actually had Lyme disease would be denied treatment and that some would suffer as a result. He said it was rationalized that patients could appeal their denials, and that was the way that Empire physicians could sleep at night. But he also acknowledged that some patients might be unable to negotiate the tortuous appeals process and might fall by the wayside and might sustain irreversible injury as a result. Empire Blue Cross and Blue Shield ultimately did transition to a for-profit entity. Empire executives got golden parachutes worth hundreds of millions of dollars in personal profit. Vicki Logan got a handbasket to hell. When patients suffer, deteriorate neurologically, and die due to corporate decisions, who is responsible? Is there impunity, or is there a penalty? There's the case of a 6-year-old Fairfield County, Connecticut child whose mother pleaded with her pediatrician to treat for a fully engorged deer tick attachment on the side of her neck in the spring of 1995. The pediatrician refused. Flu-like symptoms developed that summer, and headache, stiff neck, and swelling of the glands draining the tick bite site developed in the fall. Personality change, hypersomnolence, and later status epilepticus developed. Seizures were so severe that pentobarbital coma was required to control them. She came under the care of Charles Ray Jones, MD, who referred her to me for a spinal tap. At the time of the spinal tap, Lyme Western blot in serum at Stony Brook showed 4 out of 5 CDC-specific IgG bands, but her ELISA screening test was negative. Dr. Jones treated her with intravenous antibiotics. Although she had sustained a degree of irreversible neurologic injury from her illness, she was making good progress on IV antibiotics for several months. Intracor's review physician refused to authorize reimbursement to the family for continuation of intravenous antibiotics, even though she was still improving. After cessation of intravenous antibiotics, intractable status epilepticus recurred. She was admitted to a tertiary care hospital and died within 1 month. An autopsy was performed. Both Dr. Charles Ray Jones and I independently telephoned the health officer charged with Lyme disease epidemiology for the Connecticut Department of Public Health, pleading with him to take the case. The purpose of our request was not to punish any physician, but to learn from the case. His response to me was, "Well, what evidence was there really that this child had Lyme disease?" and declined to accept the case. So, you take one physician in Connecticut who cares for all the children sick with chronic Lyme disease, who has never harmed a child but only helped, and put him through an attempted public crucifixion. And the court allows pediatrician John Senecal, who expressed vituperative malice towards Dr. Jones, to sit on the committee determining Dr. Jones' fate? But when a physician fails to treat a child with an engorged deer tick bite despite a mother's plea, and fails to recognize Lyme disease when the child becomes ill, including status epilepticus, and the child dies within 30 days of discontinuance of IV antibiotics made necessary by the decision of an insurance company review physician, and 2 physicians report the case to the Connecticut Department of Public Health, you don't investigate? What is wrong with this picture? I call on Dr. Jewel Mullen, Commissioner of the Connecticut Department of Public Health, to investigate this case now. and to determine why there was a failure to investigate it in 1997. I call on Connecticut Governor Dannel Malloy to direct the Department of Public Health to disclose how many hundreds of thousands of taxpayers' dollars have been wasted by the Connecticut Medical Examining Board's attempt to burn at the stake Dr. Charles Ray Jones. Bring this travesty of justice to an end. In 2005, a memorandum of understanding with the New York State Department of Health's Office of Professional Medical Conduct was reached through the efforts of Assemblyman Joel Miller and Adam Bradley and Assemblywoman Nettie Mayerson in conjunction with Governor Pataki's chief counsel not to investigate physicians merely because they held a minority opinion concerning diagnosis and treatment of Lyme disease. Recently, in New York State, 6 physicians who care for persons with chronic Lyme disease have been simultaneously under investigation by the OPMC. What message does this send to other physicians? What implications does this have for persons with chronic Lyme disease to access proper care within New York State and elsewhere? If nothing else, it indicates that a memorandum of understanding is inadequate to protect physicians and the patients with chronic Lyme disease who depend on them for care. Force of law is necessary to accomplish this and to compel insurers to pay for treatment their physicians have determined is medically necessary for this condition. Legislation containing some or all of these elements has been passed or is currently under consideration in a number of states. Insurers can never be trusted to do the right thing for patients with chronic Lyme disease. Such decisions must be taken out of the hands of the insurance industry. Then there's the case of Jennifer Lilly. She sustained a tick bite while in western New Jersey, followed by a classic bullseye rash and severe headache. She was told by a succession of physicians she could not have Lyme disease because her screening tests for Lyme disease were negative, and she received no treatment for Lyme during the first 3 years of her illness. When I saw her, I diagnosed Lyme disease based on her history and instituted treatment at her initial visit. Her Lyme ELISA at SUNY Stony Brook was still negative, but her IgM and IgG Western blots were fully diagnostic. Most likely because of the delay in her diagnosis, lesions were evidenced on an MRI of her brain, and this formerly highly productive woman has had to seek disability. When the Frederick County, Maryland Department of Health contacted me to complete a Lyme disease reporting form, I decided to accompany it with a detailed letter which I copied to Dr. Thomas Frieden, former New York City Health Commissioner and now Director of the Centers for Disease Control. Since Jennifer's case was a glaring example of the deficiencies of the two-tiered system of Lyme disease testing recommended by the CDC and responsible for so much patient suffering. Dr. Frieden never personally responded to my letter. Presently, we have underway a vast, de facto, nation and worldwide Tuskegee experiment of untreated and undertreated chronic Lyme disease. Neither the United States Public Health Service, predecessor to the CDC, nor the medical profession brought the Tuskegee experiment to a halt. Senator Edward Kennedy's hearings held in 1972 ended that shameful episode. Moral force brought the ignominious Tuskegee experiment to an end. In the year 2000, due to fortuitous circumstances and unbeknownst to Dr. Dottweiler, I gained access to CDC-funded experimental methods in his research laboratory for more than 140 specimens of frozen spinal fluid on my patients. Whereas only 2% of specimens tested positive on standard spinal fluid tests, some 62% of specimens tested positive on one or more of the 4 experimental assays used. Ironically, Vicki Logan's CSF tested more than 7 times higher than the positive cutoff for detection of outer surface protein C antigen in the very laboratory of Empire Blue Cross and Blue Shield's own expert consultant. I asked laboratory supervisor Priscilla Munoz how they knew these methods were valid. She replied that the 3 collaborating research laboratories shared aliquots of samples and found excellent reproducibility between the 3 labs. The results of these CDC-funded studies on direct detection of outer surface protein A and outer surface protein C antigen and IgG and IgM Borrelia-specific immune complexes in spinal fluid have never been published. Why not? Did someone at CDC deep six the results of this research project? If so, who made this decision and why? I demand that the raw data from these CDC-funded research studies, which have never seen the light of day, be made public immediately. Thomas Frieden, the director of the CDC, can set the tone for the agency. I call on him to step up to the plate and fix the mess created by CDC. Dr. Frieden can redeem the reputation of CDC, which is composed of fine physicians and scientists. Dissociate CDC from the disgraced IDSA Lyme disease guidelines. Otherwise, step down. I call on New York State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman to undertake an additional, independent, in-depth, and far-reaching investigation with subpoena power and testimony under oath of the 2006 IDSA Lyme disease guidelines and of the health insurance industry in order to determine whether or not, in the matter of chronic and seronegative Lyme disease, there has been collusion to perpetrate a premeditated, systematic, and pervasive health care fraud upon the citizens of New York State that he has a sworn duty to protect. Remember AIDS? Persons with HIV were abused, despised, and neglected until ACT UP activists threw blood on the steps of St. Patrick's Cathedral. Only then did things begin to change. Because of that activism, $2 billion per year has been expended on AIDS research and treatment over the past several decades, and real progress has been made. Contrast that with some $20 million per year spent on Lyme disease by the federal government. Why are resources commensurate with the threat posed by Lyme disease not being allocated? Start funding to the tune of $2 billion per year for Lyme and tick-borne diseases, and trust me, you will see progress. Federal funds should not be squandered further on those who are ideologically committed to the false proposition that chronic Lyme disease does not exist. Paul Starr, who graduated Columbia College a year ahead of me, correctly predicted the coming of the corporation in his prescient book, The Social Transformation of American Medicine. But Starr also commented that the future of American medicine is ours to shape by the choices that we make. Patients have the power, but they must be united and not squabbling with one another. They must be proactive, militant, and resolute. There are lots of things patients can do. They can write to their state assembly persons and state senators. They can meet with their state assembly persons and state senators. They can do the same with their U.S. congresspersons and senators and their state's governors. They can write to Connecticut Governor Malloy and tell him to call off the dogs. They can write to Attorney General Schneiderman with details of their cases and how they have been mistreated by insurers girded by IDSA guidelines that are scientifically, therapeutically, and morally bankrupt, and which endorse and enable medical neglect as a standard of care for persons with chronic Lyme disease. They can write to Governor Cuomo, President Obama, and First Lady Michelle Obama, persons of conscience and compassion, urging them to act. Sometimes a little rebellion is necessary. Thank you very much for your attention. And I think that concludes our rally. We're going to have a little bit of music, so stick around for a few minutes. And again, thank you all for being here. And remember, you have the power, but you just have to use it constructively. Thank you so much.
Hey guys, remember there are more of us than there are of them in the White Ivory Tower. We can take control, you know? I just wonder if a group of us got together and turned the doctors who didn't treat us into the Office of Professional Medical Conduct in New York State, if the tables wouldn't be turned by us. It's time, guys. It's time that we had justice. Report the doctors that did not diagnose you and caused you harm. Let the state see the other side. Thanks.
Also, if you can go on TBDA website and go to the advocacy link and vote so your voices can be heard, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.